Good day everyone! So another day, another lesson. So for today's session, we are going to talk about structuralism and post-structuralism. So our lesson would be nothing without our learning objectives. So the first objective that we have here is explain the key concepts, principles, and differences between structuralism and post-structuralism after watching the instructional video showing clear understanding of how each theory interprets language, meaning, and text. And second, demonstrate appreciation of diverse perspectives on meaning and interpretation by expressing reflective insights or opinions about how structuralist and post-structuralist ideas apply to everyday communication or literature. So are you ready? Of course you are ready. Now we have structuralism. So we have here a little brief background on what is structuralism. So structuralism is a theoretical framework that began in the late 19th and early 20th century in Europe, mainly through the work of Ferdinand de Saussure, a Swiss linguist. Structuralism believes that meaning is created through relationships and systems, not from single elements. For example, in language, a word only has meaning because of its differences from other words. We understand day because it's the opposite of night, or hot because it's different from cold. This shows that meaning is formed through the connection and contrast of ideas. Structuralism encourages us to look beyond the surface and focus on the patterns that organize meaning in language, stories, and culture. So in the structuralism, we are not just focusing on the word, we also focus on the pattern and the structure of the word. Understood? We have here two persons who are pioneers of structuralism. Number one, we have Claude Lévi-Strauss. He introduced the idea that myths and stories share common patterns across culture. In the structural study of myth, he showed that human thinking is shaped by opposites like good and evil or life and death. Number two is Roland Barthes. He expanded structuralism into language and culture. Barthes explained how meaning is formed through signs, which is the signifier or the form, and the signified is the idea. He revealed that everyday things and media carry deeper cultural meanings. We also have here Ferdinand de Saussure. Ferdinand de Saussure is called the father of structuralism because his ideas about language became the foundation of this theory. He said that language is a system of signs, and each sign has two parts, which is the signifier, it is the word or sound that we see or hear. Number two is the signified, it is the idea or image that the word represents in our minds. For example, the word footsteps. Footstep is the signifier, while the significant is the idea or image of someone walking or the sound of shoes hitting the ground. Saussure also said that the connection between the word and its meaning is not natural. It's based on social agreement. For example, in English we say footsteps, but in Filipino we say mga yapak. They sound different, but they mean the same thing. This shows that meaning depends on the relationships and differences between signs, not on the word alone. Saussure's ideas help other scholars study how meaning works in culture, literature, and society, not just in language. Structuralism became popular in France during the 1950s to 1960s. It influenced different fields such as literature, anthropology, and philosophy. This means that structuralism was not just for one subject. It became a way of studying how everything in human life has an underlying structure or pattern. For example, in literature, it helps us see how a story's characters, themes, and events are connected. In anthropology, it helps us understand how families, traditions, and cultures are organized. And in philosophy, it helps explain how human thoughts and ideas are shaped by these hidden structures. This shows that structuralism became a big movement that changed how people studied and understand the world.
Hello everyone, my name is Bernales and today I'll be discussing structuralism. So structuralism is about finding the underlying system or structure that gives meaning to language, stories, and culture. So it means structuralism basically is understanding the structures behind meaning. Structuralists believe that language works like a system. It has rules, patterns, and relationship between words. So structuralism is about finding the hidden structures that shape how we understand the world. It suggests that everything, our language, culture, and experiences, can be broken down into smaller parts or elements. These parts follow certain patterns and rules, and these structures are often shared across all humans. Everything in human experience can be broken down into basic structures or elements, building blocks of human experience, key to understanding human experience. These structures are universal. So just like I said before, that these parts follow certain patterns and rules, and these structures are often shared across all humans. Relationship between different elements of human experience are as important as the elements. Uncover the structure of human experience, so these structures are often hidden or unconscious. So structuralism teaches us that meaning doesn't come only from individual things, but from the relationship between them. In other words, to understand something, we need to look at how it connects to other things within a larger structure. Words don't have meaning on their own. They get meaning by being different from other words in the system. So let's focus on the words, on the keyword. Language works like a system. Let's remember that because words have meaning only because they're different from other words. They get meaning by being different from other words. So let's focus on that because when we think about a word cat means it's a cat because it's not a dog or a rat. So when we see the word cat, we know what it looks like because it has already a meaning that is being different from other words. So meaning is created by differences, not by direct link to the real world. Structuralism treats a text as closed system. Meaning can be found by studying how its parts work together, not by focusing on the author's feelings, intention, or history. So, in literature, structuralism sees text as closed system. That means we study how the elements work, like the characters, symbols, and plot, and how it interact to create meaning. So we do not focus on the author's emotions or life, but on the structure of the text itself. In addition, this theory emerged from theories of language and linguistics, where it looks at the underlying elements and structures in culture and literature that can be used as a channel to further interpret the surface meaning of the text or idea. So structuralism was inspired by the study of language and linguistics. It tries to uncover the deep patterns that shape not only language but also culture, stories, and ideas. Since language is our second main tool for thinking and communication, studying its structure helps us understand how we create meaning. Structuralists believed in order to fully understand concept or idea, one must look on its underlying elements and structures and see the common patterns involved. So structuralists believe that if we want to understand a concept or idea, we must look onto its underlying elements and structures. So if you want to understand a word, we don't need to focus on the word itself, but we need to focus on the elements inside that word. So as we remember, structuralism is a form or a theory. It's a theory that helps us understand the words and how does this word different from others. Because we are not looking into the word, but we are looking to its hidden meaning. So we have here an example, a tree and a leaf. So in structuralism, meaning doesn't exist in isolation. It comes from relationship between elements within a structure. For example, this leaf has meaning only when we see its connection to the tree. If we remove the leaf and study it alone, we lose part of its meaning because what it is and what it does depends on its relationship to the tree. This idea shows how structuralists think. Every element, whether it's word, an idea, or cultural symbol, is part of a bigger system. To understand the leaf, we must understand the tree. And to understand the tree, we must see how all its parts work together. So in short, structuralism teaches that meaning is rational and systematic. Each part gets its identity from the structure it belongs to. Now another example is the egg and a chicken. So in structuralism, no element has meaning on its own. Meaning is created by its relationship to other elements within a system. So we must not think of a word of the egg itself only because it must be within a system of the chicken. For example, when we say egg and chicken, we instantly understand them together. The egg exists because there's an idea of a chicken, and a chicken exists because it came from an egg. So, one doesn't have meaning without the other. This shows that meaning is relational. It depends on how elements connected and interact inside a structure. That's what structuralists study, patterns and system that link everything together. Just like the chicken and egg, every concept gains its identity by how it fits within a bigger structure of relationships. Since language is the basic structuralism, in addition to the outmost tenet mentioned earlier, that structuralism composes underlying structures and patterns, further studying language can guide us towards analyzing and understanding literary pieces. According to Saussure, language is just a complex system of signs. All words we say, all human activities, even our perception and thoughts are constructed, and it's not natural. The linguist Ferdinand de Saussure explains that language is made of signs. Each sign has two parts: the signifier, which is the word or sound, and the signified, the mental image or concept it represents. Sign is the smallest unit of the meaning, and it is composed of two, signifier and signified. He also said that language is arbitrary. There's no natural reason why we use the word dog to represent that animal. It's simply agreed by the society. Another tip to remember structuralism is we must think that structuralism is always has this meaning comes from relationship, patterns, and differences, not from things themselves. Okay? So, here's the flow of structuralism: structure, pattern, relationship, and meaning. So that's it for my topic. The next slide will be discussed by Cadano.
Good day. So now it's time to proceed to the next basic tenet, which is the language is relational. So the second basic tenet says that language is relational. That means words only make sense because of how they relate to other words. For example, take the word cat. It means something because it's not dog, rat, or bat. If cat were the only word that existed, it wouldn't really have any meaning. So basically, language only works when words connect to or differ from one another. We understand things because we know what they are not. So the next basic tenet is language is constitutive. The third tenet says that language is constitutive. This means that language doesn't just describe our world, it actually creates it. The words we use shape how we see and understand things around us. For example, if your language has many words for snow, you start noticing different types of snow. Or when we call someone a hero instead of a rebel, it changes how people see them, even if they did the same thing. So, the language we use really influences our thoughts and perspective.
In other words, when we say that language is constitutive, it means that language does not just describe or label things around us. Instead, it creates or shapes the way we see and understand the world. In simpler terms, language helps build reality. The words we chose and the way we speak actually influence our thoughts and beliefs, and even our actions. Just like the language we use every day determines what we notice, how we think, and how we react to people and situations. That's why we say that language doesn't just reflect our world, it sets or constructs it.
Example, Cinderella story. We can see these ideas clearly in the story of Cinderella, when we describe her as a poor girl who was mistreated, got magical help, went through a transformation, and finally got a happy ending.
Those words guide how we see her story. If we change those words, like calling her a servant instead of poor girl, or serving with also luck instead of magic, the story would feel totally different. And that's how a powerful language is. It doesn't just tell the story, it creates how we understand it. To wrap it up, language is constitutive means that our words and the way we use them have real power. They shape what we see, how we think, and even how we treat others. Language doesn't just describe our world, it helps build it, like a lens through which we view everything. That's why being aware of our language is important, because it can influence how we understand people, stories, and life itself. And that is all about the basic tenets, and now we proceed to the post-structuralism and the significance of it, which will be led by the next reporter.
So, we've seen how structuralism tries to find stable patterns and meanings beneath language and culture. But later on, people started to ask, is meaning really that stable? What if meaning isn't fixed at all? What if it changes depending on who's reading or when it is read? Those questions open the door to a whole new way of thinking. And that is where post-structuralism begins, challenging the idea of structuralism. Post-structuralism is difficult to define or summarize. Nevertheless, it can be broadly understood as body of distinct of structuralism. Post-structuralism is a way of thinking that is not easy to explain in a few words. It's not one single theory, but rather a group of ideas that came as a reaction against structuralism. Structuralism tried to find fixed patterns or structures in language or culture, while post-structuralism said, it's not that simple. Meaning and truth can never fix. Now, there are two reasons of difficulty. First, rejects definitions that claim to have discovered facts or absolute truths about the world. Post-structuralists don't believe that there is one ultimate truth about anything. They argue that what we call truth is always influenced by language, culture, and perspectives. Second, very few people have willingly accepted the label post-structuralist. They have been labeled as such by others. Most of the famous thinkers we call post-structuralists never called themselves that. Others gave them that label later on because their ideas fit to a similar pattern, questioning fixed meaning, identity, and the truth. So there isn't a clear group or movement that all agreed on what post-structuralism is. No one has felt compelled to come up with a manifesto of post-structuralism. A manifesto is a document that clearly states a group's belief and goals, like a guidebook or declaration. Now, unlike other movements, post-structuralism doesn't have one. Since it resists fixed definitions, it would go against its own ideas to try to define itself in one solid way. That is why there is no official guide or rulebook for post-structuralism. Now, let's have a brief background about when was post-structuralism started. Now, post-structuralism began in France in the late 1960s and the early 1970s as the critique of structuralism. Structuralism believed that everything, language, culture, literature, could be understood through underlying systems or patterns. Post-structuralism challenged that, saying those systems don't explain everything. Now, there are main thinkers, include Roland Barthes, who was confirmed structuralist but somehow still opposed to its idea, and later published his The Death of Author in 1968. He said that meaning doesn't come from the author but from the reader. We also have Jacques Derrida, created the idea of deconstruction, greatly opposed the limitations provided by structuralism, showing that texts can have many meanings and are full of contradictions. Additionally, he pointed out that language is unstable. We also have Michel Foucault, explored how language and power are connected. He showed that what we call knowledge often reflects who has control in society. As post-structuralism evolved, it also opened up new ideas of thought and criticism. Post-structuralist ideas influenced many fields such as feminism, psychoanalysis, Marxism, and phenomenology. These movements use post-structuralism to question old ideas about identity, gender, power, and knowledge. Now, for example, feminists use it to show that gender rules are not natural but created by language and culture. Marxists use it to question how language supports systems of economic power. Psychoanalysis use it to explore how identity is not fixed but shaped by unconscious forces and social structures. Now, let's break down the main ideas that post-structuralism is trying to tell us. I'll be showing you some pictures and try to describe and explain what they mean in your own words. Now, let's get started. So, what can you see about this picture? How about this one? And this one? How about this? How did you define them? Do you think all of you have the same interpretation? Well, if structuralists will answer, it would say yes, because they believe words have a universal meaning. For example, the word apple clearly refers to a fruit, and a family usually means a group made up of a father, a mother, and their children. Post-structuralists, on the other hand, would say no, because meaning depends on personal experiences and perspectives. For one person, a family might mean parents and children, but for other, it could define by love, connection, even including friends and their pets. Now, what is post-structuralism? Post-structuralism says that meaning is not fixed or permanent. It depends on how language, readers, and culture interact. In other words, a text doesn't have one final meaning that stays the same forever. The way we understand it changes depending on our background, time period, and perspective. Post-structuralism grew out of structuralism, but challenged its idea that meaning is stable and can be neatly mapped. Structuralism thought that if we study language carefully, we can find clear patterns that explain how meaning works. While post-structuralism said this isn't possible because meaning is always changing. It can be mapped like a science. It depends on history, context, and interpretation. Generally, this theory has one basic thought, that is, literature has no singular meaning. Different readers can interpret the same text in different ways, and all of those interpretations can be valid. Meaning is not something the author completely controls. It is something created between the text and the reader. Post-structuralism argues that language can't perfectly represent reality. The link between words and the real-world things is unstable. Words don't have a perfect or permanent connection to the things they describe. Now, influenced by Derrida's theory of deconstruction, which showed how texts contain contradictions and multiple meanings. Derrida's deconstruction is a key idea in post-structuralism. It shows that every text has contradictions and hidden meanings.
Hello, good day, class. Alright, I hope that everyone is doing fine and doing good. Just sit, relax, and let's learn together. So, my part is I will be discussing to you the basic tenet of post structuralism. So, there are five, and let's start with number one. So, the slide shows that meaning is not fixed. It means, class, that in post-structuralism challenges the idea that words or texts have a single, a permanent meaning. Instead, it argues that meaning is fluid. It means, class, that it changes depending on the reader, the time, the place, or the situation. For example, the word freedom can mean independence for a person living in an oppressive country, but it can mean also, class, rebellion or disobedience for someone in power. No, it's something like that. So let's move on to basic tenet number two, class. That language is what? An unstable. Post-structuralists believe that language, no, the system of words and meanings, is not stable. Words don't hold permanent meanings. Their definitions shift depending on how they are used, who uses them, and in what context. For example, the word light might refer to brightness in one sentence. Now, for example, the light shines through the window. No, it emphasizes or it refers the brightness in a sentence. But to knowledge in another, for example, she found the light of truth. It's something like that. Or even in goodness, he chose the light over darkness. Therefore, words are slippery. They cannot fully capture reality. That's why writers or poets or also the readers constantly reinterpret language. All right, so let's move on to basic tenet number three. So the author doesn't control meaning, the reader does. In traditional literary theory class like structuralism or formalism, focus on the author's intention itself. In Poe's structuralism breaks away from that. It argues that once a text is written, the author loses control over it. So the reader becomes the center of meaning making. In this bio class, reading is an active process. The reader's background, experiences, and emotions shape how they understand a text. No two readers will interpret a text exactly the same way. And that's not a problem. It's the essence of interpretation. So, have you ever read something that meant one thing to you, but something completely different to your classmate or friend? So let's move on to basic tenet number four. Texts are connected, or the word intertextuality. So this tenant class introduces the concept of intertextuality, which means that no text exists in isolation. So every text is connected to other texts that came before it or that will come after it. For example, modern retellings of Cinderella still connect to the original fairy tale even though they may include modern settings, no, or feminist ideas. Movies like The Lion King can be linked to Shakespeare's Hamlet. No, even memes, songs, and social media posts today are filled with references to older media. Last part or last tenet of post-structuralism is the power, culture, and ideology shape meaning. So this tenet class emphasizes that meaning is never neutral or purely personal. It is also shaped the culture, by culture, power structures, and social ideologies. Now, for instance, a story about a rebellious woman may be seen as inspiring and empowering in a modern Western culture, but as disrespectful or immoral in a traditional or conservative society. Similarly, in political, what else? Rebellious and economic powers and influence what kinds of meanings are accepted or silenced. So this means that reading and interpretations are not just literary acts, they are also social and political acts. So let's discuss this slide. So the author and the reader. So this slide class shows a shift of focus from the author to the reader. What author writes, it comes from how the reader understands it. So let's move on to the next slide. The post-structuralism, the reader response theory. So this slide class introduces one of the main ideas under the post-structuralism, which is the reader response theory. So this theory says that meaning is not found inside the text itself, but in the interaction between the text and the reader to other texts that came before it by influence, theme, or style. So this shows that meaning is always shaped by other meanings. When you read or watch something, you're also connecting it to other stories. So can you name a movie No, so can you name a movie or a song today that inspired by or connected to an older story? Comment down below. Alright, for summary, this three slide tells us that post-structuralism class focuses on the reader's rule and the connections between texts. And that's it. And that ends our discussions these today. And I hope that you've learned something about our topics. And if you have any questions, that just comment down below or just PM us, that just private message us.